if you download the app right now at KBLA 1580. I was out yesterday and had a woman walk up to me, introduce herself, and she didn't know about KBLA. I had her pull her phone out right there on the spot, and we downloaded the app on her phone yesterday in real time. And it was funny because she didn't realize all the things this app could actually do. She was just tickled to death when she downloaded the app and saw all the possibilities that come courtesy of our app. So if you've not downloaded the app, do it right now. KBLA 1580, as I said, anywhere in the world you go, you can listen to us in real time. Should you miss us any day in real time, check out the podcast of our program by going to the app, the website, Anchor, Spotify, Apple, so many places to get the podcast and listen at your leisure. Should you miss us any day in real time, but I am delighted to have you along live with us today for the next 3 hours. You can also watch the live stream of this program by tapping on the KBLA TV icon on our app or by going to our YouTube channel. Let me also invite you finally to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, one of the most important struggles of the civil rights movement occurred in Lowndes County, Alabama. Interestingly, the issues in Lowndes County then reflect large issues in America today, most primarily the systemic neglect of marginalized communities. A conversation then with a noted public intellectual and scholar, Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, who also just happens to be the brother of House Minority Leader Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. Hassan is the first Hakeem, as you know, is the first African American to lead either party in either house of Congress. So Congressman Hakeem Jeffries' brother, noted scholar Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, joins us today in hour two. Brilliant brother, should be a great conversation. And I was talking yesterday about Randall Robinson, did a tribute to Randall Robinson. I've known this for years, of course, but I was underscoring in my tribute to Randall yesterday how cool it is to see these two young brothers who were born in Richmond, Virginia, in the Jim Crow and Jane Crow South. Randall Robinson and his brother Max Robinson. Randall goes on to be one of the first black folk to graduate from the Harvard Law School, founds Trans-Africa Forum, and Mandela, if he were here now, would tell you, had it not been for Randall's leadership, he might still be in a prison in South Africa. So Randall, just an amazing life. We celebrated his life and legacy yesterday, passing away last Friday at the age of 81. His brother Max ends up being the first African-American to anchor a network news program. Max Robinson, the anchor on ABC back in the day. So that's Randall and Max. And today we have Hassan and Hakeem, two Jeffries brothers, one a scholar and the other making history as the first African-American to lead either party in either house. I love celebrating black excellence. In our third hour, a conversation about philanthropy in America. Philanthropy has typically been linked to white elites, but who actually gives in this country? Who does the giving, really? And what about the long-standing tradition of giving, supporting, and advocating for social justice in communities of color, particularly among women, since March is Women's History Month? A conversation in hour three with Professor of Philanthropic Studies at Indiana University, Dr. Tyrone McKinley Freeman, who will join us live in studio. But in this first hour today, we're joined by social and environmental justice advocate Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. Last week, Congress, speaking of Congress, they reintroduced the Environmental Justice for All Act, which would provide the most sweeping environmental justice overhaul and protections ever adopted in this country. For a conversation now about the significance of the legislation and what it could mean for communities of color, I am pleased to welcome back to this program Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. Mustafa Santiago Ali, how are you today, sir?
I'm blessed, sir. Thank you for having me.
Man, it's my great delight to always be in dialogue with you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. A lot to unpack in this hour. I want to talk first about this act and the other things that we can stretch our way into, given your brilliance and your range. I love taking your temperature on any number of things. But let me start with this. The key word in this sentence for me is reintroduced. Congress last week reintroduced the Environmental Justice for All Act. So for those who weren't following this and don't understand how significant this bill is, we'll get to that in a second. But why is it being reintroduced? What happened the first time around?
Well, you have to do the work. My grandfather was a farmer. You got to plant the seeds sometimes, and you got to water those seeds. Congressman Donald McEachin, which is also the bill is now named the A. Donald McEachin Environmental Justice for All Act, was one of the first to introduce it a couple of years ago. And we just had to continue to build support. So a number of amazing people have been a part of that journey. One of the reasons, Tavis, this piece of environmental justice, or really a piece of legislation, is different is because there have literally been hundreds and hundreds of frontline organizations that were a part of the design and implementation of this piece of legislation. And that's different than the way many pieces of legislation are done on Capitol Hill, which is done with lobbyists instead of real people.
Yep. We'll talk about those real people who were involved, have been involved, are in fact involved in advancing this legislation. As I said a moment ago, though, you have such a range. I know this conversation is going to go in a variety of directions, and here we are pivoting already 3 minutes in. Here's the first pivot. You mentioned a moment ago that you have to, according to your father, your grandfather, you have to plant the seed and water it and tend to it to get it to grow. And public policy, again, isn't easy. You have to advance these bills and find the votes, and you know how the process works. But as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that the same can be said of gun violence in this country, that you have to keep reintroducing the bill, keep pushing it, keep preaching, as it were, to get people to understand why we have to address these environmental issues right now. We saw yesterday another mass shooting where our precious babies were killed. And here again, one of those issues that we just keep pushing, we keep pushing, and nothing seems to move. So a broad question here, whether it's the environment or whether it's guns, what say you, Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, about why we keep having these perennial fights on things that clearly matter to us? And let me just put a finer point on it, on issues that really are life and death, guns and the environment.
Oh, most definitely. Well, first of all, guns and the environment are actually connected, and we can unpack that. But the reason we continue to have these conversations is that those who are in power on Capitol Hill continue to devalue the lives of Black and brown folks and indigenous folks, sometimes lower wealth white folks as well. So we have to understand the power that exists inside of our vote and the civic process. And that's why on the local, the county, the state, and the federal level, we got to get engaged to make sure that we are beginning to minimize and hopefully one day completely eliminate these disproportionate impacts that happen in our communities. You know, when we talk about on the gun violence side, and you may not know, I actually helped to write the Can Do bill with Bobby Rush back in 2007, 2008. You know, when we've got 1 million people who have been shot over the last decade, when we've got this 129th mass shooting, when we have the leading cause of death for children happens to be through gun violence, then we know that we have a serious problem. And we also know disproportionately it is impacting our communities. Let's tie that also into what goes on in relationship to climate. There are studies out there that show that when temperatures increase, violence increases. So if we know people continue to pack guns into our communities, that they continue to create trauma inside of our communities, and then you overlay that with both increased temperatures, which we know are happening, and then the pollution that also exists inside of communities that has mental health connections as well, then we are creating these dynamics where our communities are going to continue to have the crosshairs on them. Our communities are going to continue to be sacrifice zones. And the Environmental Justice for All Act is focused on eliminating those sacrifice zones. So sacrifice zones, that come from pollution, that come from disinvestment. And I would be one who says that also gives us an opportunity to address some of the violence that is happening and being perpetrated on our communities.
This is going to be a rich conversation, as I promised you. It's going to be a rich hour. He's already weaving things together in ways I hadn't even imagined. I bet you never thought about a connection between climate and guns, did you? Had you? Well, Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali has now made that connection between climate and guns. I want to interrogate that when we come forward. Also, this notion of sacrifice zones. I love the nomenclature in this conversation already. Sacrifice zones. We'll talk about that and a great deal more. Just getting started with the brilliant public intellectual and scholar, environmental expert, Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, who you're listening to right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Good thing we've got 3 hours.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward. KBLA Talk 1580 celebrates women's history, spotlighting women in our community who are creating positive change. This KBLA Women's Leader Series, sponsored by Walmart, spotlights Molly Bell. Please meet Molly Bell. Molly Bell is a community activist and prayer warrior. Straight out of Compton, Molly Bell's activism and dedication to service and community has gained her recognition as an honorary member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. Molly Bell exemplifies one who is worthy of the KBLA Women's Leader Series sponsored by Walmart. KBLA and Walmart salutes Molly Bell. This KBLA Women's Leader Series, sponsored by Walmart, spotlights Gabrielle Earl. Gabrielle has taken part in developing and establishing the Black Family Circle Parent Advisory Committee for the ABC School District. Gabrielle was a disaster service worker during the pandemic, helping support the unhoused. Gabrielle is an employee for the City of Los Angeles, Port of LA as a wharfinger. Gabrielle was awarded the LABP Trailblazer Award in the City of Los Angeles in February 2023. KBLA and Walmart salutes Gabrielle Earl.
The double steak grilled cheese burrito is back at Taco Bell. And in case you didn't know, it's stacked. Yeah, packed inside it is a double serving of premium grilled marinated steak and a melty 3-cheese layer. Then on top of that, it has a layer of grilled bubbly cheese on the outside. Yeah, the outside. Why? Probably because it refuses to be caged in by the confines of its tortilla walls. Or maybe just to add more cheesy flavor.
Double steak grilled cheese burrito. Get one today, only at Taco Bell. At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only while supplies last. Double steak claim as compared to steak quesadilla. Contact store for hours of participation which varies.
Here at NerdWallet, we often see people struggle with financial decisions, like with Helen. Hey, Helen.
Hello.
Helen, you're all over the place.
I'm trying to pick a rewards credit card, and I've ended up, well, everywhere.
With NerdWallet, you don't have to feel all over the place. NerdWallet has side-by-side comparisons of top credit cards. So whether you need a card for groceries or travel, the smartest card for you is right there.
Wow. Now I'm in one place with the right travel rewards card. Nice.
Nice indeed. NerdWallet, the smartest decision for all your financial decisions.
Let's unpack a little bit more with Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues right now.
It does indeed with our guest in this hour, Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. Delighted to have him on in this hour. You said a few things already, Mustafa, that I want to come back to and get you to sort of unpack for me. This phrase, sacrifice zones, it's arresting to hear. I guess the lead question here, and you can take it from there and run with it, is who's being sacrificed and who's doing the sacrificing in these zones?
Yeah, well, it is Black and brown folks. It is Asian and Pacific Islander folks. It is indigenous brothers and sisters, and sometimes lower wealth white communities who are the ones that are being sacrificed. And we know this historically through policy. So we know through redlining and restrictive covenants that we push people into certain areas. We disinvested in those areas. And our policy around transportation, we use roads and bridges to break up communities, and then to allow wealth to go to other communities and to allow the things that nobody else wanted to be placed in our communities: coal-fired power plants, incinerators, landfills, a number of these different types of things. And they then put extreme pressure on our health. And in many instances, you and I have had a conversation before. Right now in this country, the United States of America, we have 250,000 plus people who are dying prematurely from air pollution. And we know that it is Black and brown folks who are the ones who are losing their lives. When we look at where the extreme asthma is happening, we got 24 million folks in our country have asthma, 7 million kids, and it's Black and brown kids are the ones that are going to the emergency rooms and the ones who are losing their lives. These are kids. These are people who are in the sacrifice zones, places like Cancer Alley down there in New Orleans, running between Baton Rouge and Louisiana. Or we could bring it back home to the California area, folks who are over there in Wilmington, California, the diesel death zone, or in South Los Angeles. There are all these different locations where, because of policy, in many instances that was infused with racism and discrimination, we find that these sacrifice zones have been created. We know what they look like throughout the South. We saw what happened in Jackson, Mississippi, and the disinvestment that happened there in their water system, or in Flint, Michigan, or at so many locations. So when we talk about sacrifice zones, we're talking about, the areas where people place everything that nobody else wants and then refusing to help those communities to heal and rebuild.
Yeah. A lot of folk don't know this, and I have a really, obviously, bright audience, but a lot of people in the Black community writ large don't understand this, don't realize it because they haven't spent a lot of time traveling across the country like you and I have and many of our listeners have. But it is the case, and I want to come back to this because you raised it, about roads and bridges and other transportation modes. It's fascinating for me. I'm not naive, and neither are you, but it's fascinating for me when you travel across the country. I don't care what state you're in. what city you're in. It's true all across the country. There are certain transportation models and modes that they don't want anywhere near them. it's just that road is not, that bridge is not going to come through here. That freeway is not going to come through here. And it's like that all across the country. It'd be laughable if it weren't so serious, but the way that this has been designed for decades, and the fact that it continues to be designed in that way, it's I'm trying to find the right word. It's distressing. But to your point, it's been done for decades as a matter of public policy. Yes.
Oh, without a doubt. And there's an acronym for those things that we would never place in, middle white communities or upper middle income or wealthy white communities, and it's NIMBY, not in my backyard. And white brothers and sisters will fight, with extreme prejudice to make sure that these types of things never make it in their communities. You won't see a bus depot that's sitting there idling in a wealthier white community. You won't see a waste treatment facility in a wealthier white community. You won't see an incinerator in a wealthier white community because those brothers and sisters say no. And they also utilize their privilege and access to make sure, both in the planning process and in their engagement with those on state houses and on Capitol Hill.
Yep. I'm working my way back to this Environmental Justice for All Act, reintroduced last week in Congress. We'll unpack that more in a second here. But again, just trying to interrogate some of the things that Mustafa said earlier that I think are worth going back to. Let me move now to this issue of climate and guns. Again, when you said that, my mind went to the one example that all the mainstream news media likes to cite every year, and that's the city of Chicago. We see that the mayor there, Lori Lightfoot, lost her bid for re-election. There is a young brother named Brandon who is in that, Brandon Johnson, who's in that race, who may be the next black mayor of the city of Chicago. Right now, as you know, the 4 biggest cities in the country have African-American mayors. We'll see if Brandon can pull it off in Chicago and keep that streak alive. That said, Chicago is always Exhibit A when it comes to guns, but you're making the connection now between guns and climate. Let me be clear. When it's 30 below in Chicago, the murder rate goes way down. But it's a long, hot summer in Chicago and in other places perennially. But you put your finger right on it, that there is a connection between climate and guns. Tell me a bit more about that, and I'll move on.
Yeah, well, we know that with extreme heat, and we know that both the IPCC report, that's a report made up of some of the best scientists from across the planet, have shared with us by the time we get to mid-century in many locations across our country, we're looking at 3-4 months of 90+ degree and sometimes 100+ degree temperatures. So if we understand that, and then we also understand that heat increases stressors, heat increases violence, and then we have that overlay of folks having access to guns and dealing with a number of other issues that are going on inside of communities, and we continue to flood those communities with guns, then it just makes unfortunate sense that there is going to be more loss of life. There are going to be more folks who are going to be shot. And we have to make sure that we are making the investments now to, one, limit guns, and then also making sure that we are rebuilding the infrastructure. We also know that violence in some instances is also tied to poverty. So with this new clean economy, we have an opportunity if we make sure that those who have been not barred but limited to other economies, that if we change that dynamic, then we can begin to chip away at all these different types of impacts that are happening inside of our community.
Which leads me right back to the reintroduction last week of the Environmental Justice for All Act. We've got some time here, so take a few minutes to just unpack why this legislation, as I said a moment ago, if adopted, it would provide the most sweeping environmental justice overhaul and protections ever in this country. So take a few minutes and tell me what's actually in this bill.
Yeah, so this is a transformational piece of legislation. Back in when John Lewis first introduced the first piece of legislation back in 1990, we haven't been able to get a piece of environmental justice legislation passed. In this moment, we have an opportunity. So the first thing that I want folks to know is that it brings in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title VI of that Civil Rights Act says that you can't utilize federal funds to discriminate against folks. So this gives people the opportunity when that dynamic happens to have more tools to be able to sue those who might be polluting their community. So it gives power, once again, back to people. The other part that's critically important for our communities is it also helps to make sure that cumulative impacts are now a part of the decision-making paradigm. Why is that important? Because in our communities, we don't have one or two polluting facilities. We often have multiple ones. And when you look at the EPA and how they regulate, they often regulate based upon one chemical or one set of actions in their permitting process. This gives us an opportunity to begin to address the synergistic and cumulative effects that often happen in our communities. One of my mentors was Hazel Johnson, who was there from the south side of Chicago, Altgeld Gardens. And they had 17 different polluting facilities. They used to call it a toxic donut. This piece of legislation would help to make sure that folks are not being overly burdened and overly polluted by a number of different facilities that often will be in compliance with their permit. So this gives us a chance to be able to breathe. This gives us a chance to be able to trust the water that we have and for our children to be able to play on the land without worrying about multiple sets of chemicals impacting their bodies. The other thing I'll bring forward is the National Environmental Policy Act, something called NEPA from back in 1969. So we're going to continue to see a lot of building that is going to happen. Everybody saw the bipartisan infrastructure bill and then the Inflation Reduction Act. So all of this money is going to be a part of the rebuilding of America in many instances. So we need to make sure that we have a strong voice in that process. And a part of the Environmental Justice for All Act strengthens our ability to play a role both in getting information and then being able to share our views on the redevelopment that will happen across our country. The other part that's important, Tavis, is around health equity and making sure that the funding is there for the grant programs to make sure that at HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions and tribal colleges and PWIs, that we are laser focused on the impacts that are happening both to women and children and folks of color in relationship to these chemicals that are out there. Everybody saw there in East Palestine, Ohio, how folks in that community were really concerned about these various chemicals and toxins that were a part of that train derailment. Those types of things have been happening in our communities for decades, and often the research wasn't laser focused on, one, those chemicals, and two, how they impact communities that are already overburdened. So having those resources are going to be critical. The other one is about outdoor access. You know, national parks are great if you can get to them, or state parks, but we got to make sure that there's green space and access to parks inside of our communities, because we understand that can play a role in helping us to be healthier the more that we can get out. But folks got to be able to feel safe, and they also got to know that those spaces are being created and expanded for our communities. And we have often had green space deserts inside of our communities. And then the other part is about a fair and just transition. And what that means is that as we are creating this new clean economy, once again, we got to make sure that the businesses are being owned by Black and brown folks, as well as being able to be a worker in this space. And this act helps to move that forward also.
Why is there such how about I put this? Why is there such a dearth and a paucity of green space in communities of color? What's that about? It's green space, it's grass. Well, why is there so little of it in communities of color?
Well, as you know, you are a student of history. You remember in the 50s and 60s and 70s, as they began to move us into certain locations, pave everything over, build high rises, and then, of course, disinvest in those high rises. You know, they often did not also see value in making sure that we were going to have access to the outdoors. It was almost like they were building these multi-story jails, if you want to say it that way, even though you could go in and out when you could. But that's the dynamic that we've seen. They never thought that our folks cared about or deserved having the dollars being focused on the creation of parks and then the maintenance of those parks. So we got to be very clear, because, you know, when we have these various sets of diseases that are going on inside of our communities, a part of it can be tied to sedentary lifestyles, but it's not because we are traditionally sedentary people. We know that folks back in Africa, continue to be very active and to move around. And then when we were brought to this country, we all know the dynamic that went on to be able to control our movement.
Yeah. Let me get news, traffic, and sports in here. We'll continue in a moment. My mind went straight to good times when you talk about those high rises that were like prisons, like jails, right? My mind immediately went to back to Chicago. You got Cabrini Green, you got Robert Taylor Holmes, you got the Ickeys, a lot in Chicago, and not only Chicago, other cities, of course, who have these kinds of structures that came into being but wiped out all the green space. We'll continue with Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The man who was photographed with his feet on then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's desk during the Capitol riot may see his sentence delayed. 62-year-old Richard Barnett was convicted by a federal jury back in October for his participation in the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol in 2021. Barnett's sentencing may be delayed after a pair of attorneys announced they are leaving his defense team. The judge says his scheduled sentencing on May 3rd may be pushed back to allow the court to rule on Barnett's post-trial motions. Mental well-being is a top priority for a majority of black professionals. A recently published report from the employment platform Oyster says 58% of black workers prioritize mental health over everything. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
A busy drive as you head through Pomona. North Hollywood, it's troubles in Long Beach. Still trying to clear a wreck on that 91 East. Eastbound 91 at Cherry. Crash to the right. Coming away from the 710, it's busy. Looks like on that 60 West to the 710 South, there's a collision here that's onto the shoulder. Griffith Park, Glendale, the 134 West at the 5. The carpool lane blocked to the crash. Approaching the 2 is where things slow down. And looks like Pomona, it's going to be a top on that 10. West 10 as you get towards Gary. A wreck onto the right. A busy drive here from 4th.
Need an accident attorney by your side? All you got to do is call the Accident Guys.
Injured in a car accident or at work? The Accident Guys can come to you almost anywhere, so you don't have to come to us. Se habla español.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Impressive game for the Clippers last night against the Chicago Bulls. They win by 12. 7 Clippers scored in double figures. 24 points from Nicholas Batum, 22 each from Kawhi Leonard and Eric Gordon. The Clippers made 23 pointers. 2-game road trip coming up for the Clippers starting Wednesday night in Memphis. For the first time since 1979, there will be no McDonald's High School All-Americans competing in the Final Four. San Diego State, UConn, Florida Atlantic, and Miami made it to the big dance without high-profile players. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. This sports report was brought to you by Original Taco Pete.
Aaron from Original Taco Pete's here, inviting you to our newest location at 3272 West Slauson off Crenshaw for Taco Tuesday, only $175. Call 323-348-4441 to order.
Tell me I'm the boy that girl.
I'm young, gifted, and black. KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody
with us. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
California is a great place to live and work, but those aren't easy things to do for students also going to college. That's why the state created the Californians for All College Corps, a way for students to build skills and help others while earning up to $10,000 for school. Commit to serve your community and we'll help you pay for college. Spots will fill up fast, so learn more and apply today at www.cacollegecorps.com. That's www.cacollegecorps.com. California is a great place to live and work, but those aren't easy things to do for students also going to college. That's why the state created the Californians for All College Corps, a way for students to build skills and help others while earning up to $10,000 for school. Commit to serve your community and we'll help you pay for college. Spots will fill up fast, so learn more and apply today at www.cacollegecorps.com. That's www.cacollegecorps.com.
Need legal help? Attorney Jovan Blacknell is an aggressive trial attorney specializing in criminal defense and civil litigation. Look no further than the law office of Jovan Blacknell. From personal injury to criminal defense, Jovan Blacknell has the knowledge to protect your rights. The law office of Jovan Blacknell understands the stress and anxiety that come with legal issues. That's why the law office of Jovan Blacknell supports the right to a fair trial. For Los Angeles Council member Mark Ridley Thomas, are you facing a legal battle? Log on to fightforjustice.com. Don't go through it alone. Let the law office of Jovan Blacknell fight for your rights. Log on to fightforjustice.com. Let the law office of Jovan Blacknell take the worry and stress out of your case. Call 310-469-9117 today for a free consultation. That's 310-469-9117 or log on to fightforjustice.com. Law office of Jovan Blacknell, where experience and dedication make the difference.
Find a righteous rage and don't be afraid to say what you see. We're KBLA Talk 1580.
As you know by now, here on KBLA Talk 1580, every day at 4:35 during Ariva's program, Ariva Martin in real time. Every day at 4:35, Ariva is in conversation with our justice correspondent, Dion Raymond, who has been in the courtroom every day during the case, the trial of USA v. MRT, United States versus Mark Ridley Thomas. The jury in that case got the case on Friday. Closing arguments wrapped on last Friday. The case was given to the jury. Today is now Tuesday, so this is their third day of deliberation, and we are told moments ago that the jury just came back with yet another note. I've lost count now. This is either 5, 6, or 7 questions that this jury has come back with for the judge and for the lawyers. The questions, I am told, that were asked moments ago. Is there a difference between method and means? And can you provide an example? Is there a difference between method and means? And can you provide an example? Second question, is there a difference between illegal and unlawful? Is there a difference between illegal and unlawful? The court and the counsel for both the prosecution and defense, both counsels, sets of counsels agreed, one, no, they cannot provide examples to the first question. And they agreed on the second question to give the government an hour. The government asked for an hour to draft a proposed response to means and method. And both sides have agreed that illegal and unlawful equal the same thing. So the prosecution asking for an hour to answer that question about means and method, which would go to directly to the issue of bribery in this case, of which MRT is accused. But they've said in the courtroom that illegal and unlawful are the same. So the jury's received one answer to one question, still waiting on a detailed response from the government to the other question about means and method. But the point of all this is that the jury keeps coming back with questions. I am no expert in this regard, but I can tell you this. I've been around this a long time. They've had this case since Friday, and they keep coming back with questions. It would suggest to me that this is not a slam dunk for the prosecution. On the other hand, it would suggest to me that acquittal is not going to come easy for MRT either. Again, I am no expert, but when they keep coming back with this many questions, what it does tell you, obviously, is that they are wrestling. They are wrestling in that jury room with a whole lot of issues. and they keep asking questions of the judge and of the counsel in this case. So no decision as yet. Could come later today, could come tomorrow. We shall see. But they're at it, and they keep popping these questions out, trying to get a better understanding as they work their way to whatever decision they're going to come to. But again, I'm untrained, not a lawyer, but it would seem to me that my sense is if they were voting right now, there'd be a hung jury. Clearly, they're wrestling with a lot of issues here. So we shall see. Tune in today at 4:35 to Ariva Martin in real time. Ariva is a Harvard-trained lawyer. I am not. So tune in to Ariva at 4:35. Dion Raymond will join her as they have every day until this case is wrapped, until we get a verdict. But again, day 3 of the jury having the case, and those are the questions we were told moments ago that just came back into the courtroom. But again, today at 4:35, Ariva will give you a great deal more detail on all the happenings, all the proceedings in the courtroom today as we await the verdict in the case of USA v. MRT. Now back to our conversation with Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali as we talk in this hour, in case you've just tuned in, about Congress reintroducing just last week the Environmental Justice for All Act, which would provide the most sweeping environmental justice overhaul and protections ever adopted in this country, as I said earlier in this hour. So we're unpacking what that means for you, what that means for me, what that means specifically for communities of color. Mustafa, let me come back to this. Earlier, you used the phrase, what this opportunity in this moment represents. Excuse me, I want to come back to that because everybody knows, obviously, that the House is now controlled by Republicans. I mentioned at the top of this hour that we'll be joined on today's show later by Dr. Second hour, in fact, so about 20 minutes from now, by Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, brilliant scholar in his own right, but Hassan Jeffries is the brother of Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House. He's minority leader, obviously, because Republicans now run the House. So what kind of opportunity is this really for passage, given that it's been reintroduced, but Democrats ain't running things in the House right about now?
Yeah, I mean, it creates a unique set of challenges, ones that have not been faced, that most definitely have been faced before. But Tavis, I think there are ways for us to strategically be able to get this bill to pass. Okay. I think one of the things that we do is that we make sure that we highlight all these lower wealth white communities who are also facing a number of these different challenges. And by doing so, it then places pressure on these members on the House side who these folks live in their districts and in their communities to say, do these lives also not matter to you? We know you've had no strong focus on black and brown lives, but these folks actually come from the places you're coming from. So I think that that's one of the ways that you begin to fully show people's true colors, right? And their allegiance often to fossil fuel industries and others. So it puts them on notice by highlighting these facts and these other folks who are also dealing with these, extreme impacts that are happening from pollution and are happening from the climate and from disinvestment in some instances.
Yeah, to your bold question, your prescient question about whether or not these lives matter to these members of Congress. It would seem to me that there's such a slight margin in the House, as you know. Republicans control it by such a slight margin. It would seem to me that there have to be a number of good white folk in Congress who represent districts that have a significant slice of people of color in their districts. And I'm wondering whether or not those persons can be appealed to. As you well know, this stuff works only because that you can count the votes. And both parties, of course, have persons whose primary role it is to count the votes. James Clyburn, as we know, was the House whip for many, many years on the Democratic side, and his primary job as House whip was to count the votes. When Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and James Clyburn got together, James Clyburn was the one in the meeting updating his colleagues on whether or not they had the votes, whether or not he could count the heads to pass a particular piece of legislation. So in this regard, I hear your hopefulness about being able to pass it, but that means you got to pick off a few Republicans. What say you, or what say those working with you about who they're targeting to make that happen?
Yeah, so there are some Republicans, who are on the House side who have said that They're looking for opportunities, especially when we bring into the analysis also the economic opportunities that are a part of this bill as well. So some of those will then begin to, take a stronger look at what's my on-ramp, if you will, to being able to go back to my folks and say why I voted for this particular piece of legislation. So folks are working that. There are a number of folks also, both in big nonprofit organizations, public health organizations, the medical organizations, who are also behind this piece of legislation. There are some folks also who are coming from the economic side of the equation saying that this makes sense because it will strengthen communities economically, strengthen our country as a whole as well. So, there are some wins of positive change that are behind it, but it is still an uphill battle because we get into, the politics situation of if this is something that was created or introduced by Democrats, then the vast majority of Republicans have a difficult time in getting behind it, even when it would help their people to live healthier lives.
Yeah, that's sick, but I digress on that point. When we come forward, I want to talk about the following, and that is whether or not Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, as brilliant as he is he an outlier in the environmental movement? And by that, I mean specifically his race, his color, his creed. Is he an outlier? We've been talking in this hour about the impact that this Environmental Justice for All Act, if passed, will have on our communities. I want to talk about whether or not we are present in this conversation, whether we are present in the work. So again, is he an outlier, or are there other people of color increasingly these days who don't just understand the impact of climate and global warming and all these things on our community, but are actively engaged and involved in the fight? We'll talk about that when we come forward with Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali on KBLA Talk 1580.
We may be LA's newest talk station, but when you're punching above your weight, it's not about whether you can throw a punch. Can you take a punch? We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. And we don't black down. KBLA Talk 1580 celebrates women's history, spotlighting women in our community who are creating positive change. This KBLA Women's Leader Series, sponsored by Walmart, spotlights Molly Bell. Please meet Molly Bell. Molly Bell is a community activist and prayer warrior. Straight out of Compton, Molly Bell's activism and dedication to service and community has gained her recognition as an honorary member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. Molly Bell exemplifies one who is worthy of the KBLA Women's Leader Series, sponsored by Walmart. KBLA and Walmart salutes Molly Bell. This KBLA Women's Leader Series, sponsored by Walmart, spotlights Gabrielle Earl. Gabrielle has taken part in developing and establishing the Black Family Circle Parent Advisory Committee for the ABC School District. Gabrielle was a disaster service worker during the pandemic, helping support the unhoused. Gabrielle is an employee for the City of Los Angeles, Port of LA as a wharfinger. Gabrielle was awarded the LAVP Trailblazer Award in the City of Los Angeles in February 2023. KBLA and Walmart salutes Gabrielle Earl.
Thanks to our new sponsor, Lendistry. Lendistry is a national Black-led small business lender that is headquartered in Los Angeles. Lendistry helps small business owners access the affordable capital needed to grow. Visit Lendistry, LENDISTRY.com/KBLA today.
It's getting hot in here.
KBLA Talk 1580 is apparently the talk of the town. From the LA Times to our talk radio competitors.
Hey, there was a story in the LA Times about Tavis Smiley. Now he is back with his own radio station, KBLA, black-owned and oriented towards the black audience. So, Mo, considering your knowledge of Tavis and his audience, what's your take on this?
Well, I think in a general industry sense, I think it's always good when there are more outlets, there are more talk radio, there's more voices and representation. At that point, I think talk radio had been too homogenous for too long.
Real quickly, is it going to succeed, yes or no?
I think it's going to succeed.
You think?
There's a new sheriff in town.
We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we don't black down.
Gotta stay fresh, my House shot with a rest spot. Shot with a rest spot. Shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
In our third hour today, Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, as you probably heard me say, we're talking about philanthropy and who actually gives in this country. I think folk may be surprised by the data as we talk to Dr. Tyrone McKinley Freeman, who is a professor of philanthropic studies at Indiana University, about, again, some fascinating data vis-a-vis philanthropy in this country, and specifically the role that women are playing in philanthropy, given that we are now in Women's History Month. So we'll see what those surprises, we'll see what the surprises await us when we get to hour 3 today about black folk and philanthropy. But I want to take your temperature now on black folk and environmental justice. Clearly, we are the disproportionate victims of racism in our environmental causes and campaigns in this country. And yet, I'm curious as to whether or not we are making progress. I always want to take your temperature on this, how you're reading our involvement in the movement writ large, and specifically as it relates to getting this piece of legislation passed.
Yeah, in relationship to the movement, when we talk about the environmental justice movement, of course, it was started by people of color. At that first People of Color Summit back in 1991 in Washington, D.C. I often think about the question you just asked me. Damu Smith was one of my mentors coming up. I know you
Yes, sure.
Damu.
Sure.
And I wonder how he would view this moment. You had asked the question about being an outlier, which shows, in networks like KBLA and what you're doing and Miss Areva Martin and bringing forward that there are black folks who know in the environment, who know climate, who know public health, and a number of other issues that are a part of this. It helps those young black and brown children to know that their voices can matter and that their expertise can be honored. So I want to thank you for that. But the reality of the situation is, that there are a number of shows across the country who often don't bring forward these issues. But often, even when talking about the impacts in our communities, we will have white brothers and sisters, on the major networks who bring those voices forward and forget about the folks who are experts in a number of different issues. So we have to make that change. Let me call out the HBCU Climate Change Initiative. Dr. Robert Bullard and Dr. Beverly Wright started that a number of years ago.
Yes.
Every year, hundreds and hundreds of black men and women who are college students come to that. And they are just amazing in the research that they're doing and the projects that they're doing, and just making, a stronger pool of folks coming up. So we have a number of talented young people who are ready, willing, and able to help us to navigate not only the challenges from the climate crisis, but also in addressing the environmental injustices that still impact our community. So I'm optimistic, but we've got to make sure that more in the media are valuing our voices and expertise.
I'm glad you raised the name of Dr. Robert Bullard. I want to just underscore what the kind words you just offered about him. He's a brilliant brother. And for those who remember The Covenant with Black America, that book that we put out years ago that became a #1 New York Times bestseller, stayed on the New York Times bestseller list at #1 for many weeks. Of all the books I've put my name on, that Covenant with Black America text just showed up and showed out, and everybody in the country was trying to get their hands on a copy of The Covenant with Black America. Well, one of the 10 covenants in that book is about the environmental justice, and the chapter in that book was written by none other than Dr. Robert Bullard. I went straight to him to ask him to write the chapter in the Covenant with Black America text. So if you've got that book somewhere near you right now on your shelf, millions were sold of that book. You'll look up the environmental justice chapter and see that all those years ago, we went straight to the source, Dr. Robert Bullard. We'll have our remaining moments in this conversation with another doctor, Mustafa Santiago Ali, when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
Made you look.
Our Weekly Los Angeles is the largest audited black newspaper in the state of California with a distribution of over 50,000 copies weekly. Pick up a copy every Thursday to get the latest news on African American communities of LA. You can also keep up with what's going on in Los Angeles and surrounding cities by going to www.ourweekly.com. The Our Weekly website is updated daily with the current news about us and for us. For your advertising needs, Our Weekly offers economical advertising packages to fit your budget. Feel free to call Our Weekly Los Angeles at 323-905-1300 or visit the website at www.ourweekly.com. Our Weekly Los Angeles, reporting news that matters to you.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 joins you in standing for education as a right, not a privilege. Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science is a private, non-profit, community-founded, student-centered university committed to cultivating diverse health profession leaders who are dedicated to social justice and health equity for underserved populations. CDU does this through outstanding education, clinical service, and community engagement. Recently, Charles Drew University made history by opening only the 5th medical school at an historically black university. Congratulations, South LA, and congratulations to the dean of the medical school, Dr. Deborah Protho-Stith. CDU is now training doctors and providing $90 million in annual economic benefit to Watts and surrounding neighborhoods. To apply for medical school, get more information, or sign your child up for the Junior Doctors Saturday School program, visit cdrewu.edu. That's cdrewu.edu. At KBLA, we are dedicated to equity in education and ending healthcare apartheid, and we don't black down. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Interrogating your assumptions and expanding your inventory of ideas. Let's get back to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali with the 3 minutes that we have left in this hour. I want to close on this note, Dr. Ali, and that is when we talk about this Environmental Justice for All Act, now reintroduced, hopefully we'll get passed this time around. One of the things that you sort of teed this up, but again, I want to close on it. One of the things that this legislation will do is to require federal agencies to consider environmental justice in their decision-making processes. It seems to me that that's a powerful piece of this legislation, because it means that all these government agencies have to do the exact opposite of what Donald Trump didn't want them to do, right? They have to include environmental justice concerns in their decision-making process. On balance, if you force all government agencies to do that, that's got to have an impact on these issues in the years to come, yes?
Oh, without a doubt. It addresses some of the cumulative impacts. It addresses the hundreds of billions of dollars that moves through agencies and departments and helps it to be better focused. And it brings power back to communities by making sure that these federal agencies and departments are focused on the needs that exist inside of our communities. It reminds me of the words of my grandmother when she says, "You have power unless you give it away." This is an opportunity to amplify power.
Yeah. When it comes to these issues, and there are many of them, and specifically how they impact our particular people, what keeps you up at night?
That there will be those who are leading in Capitol Hill that will continue to allow the building of these facilities and to increase the pollution that will have devastating impacts on our community's health, but will literally put us in a place where we'll live on a planet that's uninhabitable for everyone, but most definitely for our most vulnerable communities.
Yeah. And how are you sustaining your hope these days?
Oh, I come out of a family that prays, and I surround myself with all these amazing young people, artists and entertainers, and leaders who we continue to just feed each other positive energy and focus. And the other thing, too, is that so many more folks are beginning to pay attention to these issues and to ask the question, how is this impacting my community? Why is it impacting my community? What do I need to do to help to address what's going on?
Thought leader, strategist, policymaker, opinion maker, activist, committed to the fight for environmental justice and economic equity. He is Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, who I am always delighted to be in dialogue with. Dr. Ali, thank you for your work and witness ongoing. Good to have you back. We will do it again, sir, and hopefully do our part to get this thing across the finish line this time, the Environmental Justice for All Act.
Thank you.
My great honor. Hour 2 of Tavis Smiley. After we come forward with some news, traffic, and sports, Hassan Kwame Jeffries, I should say, that's his brother. See, Hakeem is the minority leader. His brother, Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, joins us in Hour 2. And Dr. Tyrone McKinley Freeman in Hour 3 about philanthropy. 2 great hours still in front of us. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The man who was photographed with his feet on then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's desk during the Capitol riot may see his say are leaving his defense team. The judge says his scheduled sentencing on May 3rd may be pushed back to allow the court to rule on Barnett's post-trial motions. Mental well-being